I started talking, saw it flash, so it threw me off. And we're back with Ron Durbin. Ron, this time I want to talk to you about more personal issues, not necessarily what affects business, but what's affecting the people out there. As far as your particular current expertise, which is the city ordinances. What do you think about what they're doing? Is like I know there's a lot of cities that are doing required registration for a home grow, some even with a fee.
Right.
What are you hearing in that area, and what do you think about that?
A lot of cities have passed ordinances that require patients to register. I think that is an overreach of their authority. I don't think you should be required to register your medical conditions with a governmental entity at all. But in this particular instance, 788 is the only mechanism we have to get a license to be able to engage in patients utilizing the product. So we'll live with the state. But when these cities try to do it, there's no rational basis for them needing patients to register. They don't require patients to register their opiates, their antibiotics, or any of their other medication in order to possess or use those in their home. The same logic applies here for me, and I think cities overstep their authority when they try to require that.
But I'm noticing that that's the one that's not being challenged.
I disagree that we're not challenging that. We challenge that. Any city we go up against, we challenge patient registration. And you'll see in any of those cities that we've gone up against that
Are they pulling? Are
yeah,
they?
absolutely.
They're getting rid of
Absolutely.
patient registration.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I know Coeta was, in my mind, the worst offender that I dealt with, and they were the ones that were going to require you to pay the postage to first-class mail every property within 300 feet of your property that you were going to be growing, the same way they do with a sex offender.
Yeah.
And after we threatened them with the lawsuit that night, they backed off of that over the next 48 hours, but only that part of it.
Right.
They still have the home grow registration process. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever followed that, and I certainly encourage them all not to.
Well, what I would say is that in order for a governmental entity to enter into your property, they need a warrant. And in order for them to get a warrant, they have to have probable cause to believe that you are committing a crime. And the way I look at this is under the state law, you have the right to possess, as a patient, certain amounts of medical marijuana, certain amounts of seedlings, certain amounts of plants. And, you know, if it were me, I would challenge their authority to require a patient registration. Everybody is different on what they want to do, and certainly I don't want to advise anybody to break the law. But what I would say is, if it were me, I'd be one challenging it and saying, if they showed up at my doorstep, I'd say, "Where's your warrant?" And we deal with it that way. And we've dealt with that. I had a client that got arrested for having marijuana in his home. He called the pizza delivery guy.
I heard about that one. That was pretty out there.
It was out there, but he called for a pizza delivery, and the pizza delivery driver reported him to the police for seeing medical cannabis on his coffee table. The police show up. My clients present their medical ID card. They are then subsequently escorted out of the house and made to wait while a warrant was obtained. How that judge issued that warrant is boggling my mind to this day. And they were ultimately arrested for possession of marijuana. Fortunately, we were able to get the district attorney to not prosecute and dismiss the charges. So ultimately, the clients got out of it.
Okay, and this is what bothers me the most about situations like this. Yes, you got them to not continue to prosecute, but they started affecting that person's life the minute they showed up at the
Sure.
door and started, in my opinion, violating their personal rights. What repercussions does that person have against a city that does something like that? Or is there any?
There's potentially some kind of state constitutional lawsuit related to that issue. Fortunately, Oklahoma's Constitution mirrors in many ways the U.S. Constitution with regards to personal rights. But normally when a police officer or governmental entity oversteps their authority, we bring an action on what's called 42 U.S.C. 1983. It's called 1983 action for short. And it's a federal civil rights case. Unfortunately, in this particular instance, we can't do that because it's federally illegal. So we don't have that protection of going to the federal courts for that issue.
So what do we do?
We fight them as they come up, and we educate as best we can as we go forward. And I think the word getting out there is helping. I wish I'd say it was perfect. I got somebody in Panama, Oklahoma 2 days ago. So a patient who had a patient card was pulled over for driving without a license. and was issued a citation for possession of paraphernalia for having a grinder on him. He's got a medical card. He's got the right to have cannabis.
But they can still write.
I don't agree.
Because okay, I've had this conversation with tons of people, including a few lawmakers and a business owner here in town who's extremely agitated by this one particular law. There's just no enforcement. They can. There's just no enforcement. 788 does not override or supersede existing laws.
I disagree.
It creates immediate conflict that has to be addressed by the new legislator.
I disagree. I mean, it would be nice for the legislature to deal with that because it has become an issue. But I think that it's what we call in the law repealed by implication. The fact that somebody has the right to possess marijuana, whether it's in flower or in some kind of extract form, they're going to utilize that marijuana product in some manner, whether it's a dropper from a bottle, or it's going to be smoking the flower, or it's going to be whatever it is. They have the right to take their medication. Therefore, the paraphernalia laws related to people who are utilizing those things to inhale or ingest their medication, it is no longer paraphernalia. It's repealed by implication. So I think we could win that in court without a shadow of a doubt. Fortunately, we haven't had to go that far.
And again, yes, you win that in court, but how many lives are destroyed on the way there?
I agree. Look, it's
how much money is spent by citizens to get themselves out of jail for things they shouldn't have been arrested for?
I wish there were more attorneys across the state that were doing things to try to help further this law. It's just not happening. I don't know where those attorneys are and why they're not kind of crusading with me. But the Domino's pizza delivery driver guy, I did that for free. I didn't charge him anything to do that because it's just wrong. I'm not going to charge the guys in Panama. The guy in Panama who got arrested for the grinder. I'm not going to charge him anything. And if I've got to drive to Panama, Oklahoma, to prove to them that he's got the right to take his medication with his license, then so be it. We're going to do it.
So when he gets out, does he get his grinder back?
So he only got cited.
So he was allowed to leave. So you just
leave.
had to fight a fine.
Correct. We're fighting the fine.
And how much was that fine?
I don't know yet, actually. This just came to me 2 days ago, and we're still trying to figure out what the exact status is. It's probably going to be the same as what a normal paraphernalia charge was prior to 788.
Which was what?
In Oklahoma, the actual fines never really amount to much. It's the court costs which get you. So, for example, you get a speeding ticket for like 10 over. It's probably a $10 or $20 fine and $250 in court costs. So the fine is probably relatively small. It's the court cost that they tack onto you that really gets you. I got a speeding ticket once that was a $10 fine and $170 in court costs. I fought that and won, though. So
I got a speeding ticket recently. It was just a big fat fine, and we'll just leave it at that.
Gotcha.
I was speeding, so
I didn't think I was. And my first trial was that speeding ticket, actually.
So, we talk about a couple people who have been arrested with medical cards, and I've heard from a few people who have been arrested without medical cards. Do you see the overall arrest of individuals in cannabis issues going down in Oklahoma? As far as, I'm not talking about the large quantity or the person who is muling it in. I'm talking about the user, the now patient.
I think we're going to have to wait to see the statistics that have come out, after they're analyzed by the various groups that look at court filings and what kind of criminal cases are filed. I'm seeing, in speaking with criminal attorneys across various counties, I'm seeing a decline in their business, and they're trying to figure out ways to supplement their business. So I think we're seeing a decline. Unfortunately, we passed not marijuana reforms, we passed criminal reform several years ago. In Tulsa County, for example, their charges and jail time for those same offenses that we reduced the punishments for went up because they changed the way they charged them. So, for example, instead of charging you with simple possession, they now charge you with possession with intent to distribute, which is a felony.
Right.
And so it's county specific. But I do think that the numbers generally for simple possession are going down.
So as far as the individual, one of the things I get asked is when they're carrying their cannabis, you're allowed to carry 3 ounces on you at a time. One person I dealt with thought that had to be specifically labeled a certain way. Can you address that? Is there any specific laws that address the individual carrying any and how they should be carrying that?
No, there are no laws that deal with requiring them to carry it in any kind of packaging that's labeled
And
in any manner.
nothing in these health department rules
No.
that come out addresses that? Because I was going over some of those just last night and reading about the transportation license and how that has to be in a sealed box.
But that's for transportation by a business.
But marked as
Right.
medical cannabis, but out of sight. And I'm wondering, is there any of that?
No, that transport law that you're talking about, or those regulations, I should say, those relate to, say, a dispensary transporting or a grow or a processor transporting. There are no laws or regulations related to a patient transporting their medication. What I would say is just make sure you have your medical card on you.
Right.
That's the key. And have I heard of stories of people being told by police that they need to have it in a labeled package? Yes, but is that true? No. And so what I always advise people is, when in doubt, there's an old saying in the law: you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride.
Yeah.
If the cops want to take you to jail, they're going to take you to jail. Exercise your right to remain silent. That's what you need to do. There's no reason to engage in a conversation or a debate with an officer.
Look, we've wrestled this one before.
We have.
Unfortunately, the last time we wrestled it wasn't on camera, so let's wrestle it again right
Sure,
now.
sure.
In fact, last time was in Bartlesville at that
Right.
that little conference thing we had there. That was a lot of fun.
It was.
Now, as somebody who's been in that situation, I find that in a lot of situations, if I was to shut down on an officer, I am going to invite more scrutiny.
Sure.
That will start with me being held in handcuffs because they no longer feel safe, and because of my attitude, and this is how they'll address it. And then I'll wait in their back of their car while they bring a dog to then circle my car, and if the
Right.
dog wags his tail to the left instead of the right, they'll determine that they can pull my seats out and look
Right.
and see if they could find a seat in my car.
Right.
But if I'm nice to the officer, I can sometimes go home.
In this particular instance, what I would say is, if an officer approaches you on a traffic stop, and that's normally where most people encounter police, is on a traffic stop, and they indicate that they smell the odor of marijuana in the vehicle. First of all, I always advise don't smoke in your vehicle. But if they smell it, then that right there is probably probable cause to search your vehicle. So at that point, present your medical ID card and say, I've got a medical license and I'm only carrying what I'm supposed to. And when they, then you've got to kind of make a judgment call on how much you interact with them. If you're dealing with an officer who's obviously aggressive, and you know when you're dealing with one of those,
Yeah.
then it's probably best to just back off and not talk, because again,
Right.
you're probably going to go to jail if they really want you to go to jail anyway. People get arrested on false charges all the time. But if they're
Can't beat the ride, as you said.
But if they're being friendly and they're inquiring, and you just need to keep saying, I have a medical card, I only have what I'm allowed to have. And if they say, can I search your vehicle? My answer is no, you can't search your vehicle. If they want to search your vehicle at that point, I'm going to make them go get a warrant, or I'm going to make them do something and search it without my permission. Even if I know I'm in the right, I'm going to make them do that, because I don't like my constitutional rights being trampled on. So it's a judgment call on how you interact. But it's very rare, Grumpy, that I hear of somebody talking themselves out of charges. It's very rare. Being polite is fantastic. You should be polite. But talking more than you should,
I'm not saying talking more than you should, but this idea that, you should just roll your window down far enough to pass your card out and not speak to the officer and say, as few words as possible, can really set an officer off, especially some of these officers we have in Oklahoma. I mean, I've dealt with some of these. I've been, again, the receiving end. I was in this exact situation just a couple months ago.
Right.
On the way between Oklahoma City and back here, I was pulled over late at night. My car had the odor, and he asked me if I had anything in the car. I told him I had a vape in the console. He asked what that was. I explained to him what that was. He asked if I had anything else in the car. I said no. He asked if I had anything in the trunk. I said yes. He asked what. I told him. He asked for my medical card. He looked at it. He looked at my license. He handed them both back to me and said, have a nice day, and sent me on my way. And I was on a road. There wasn't even enough of a shoulder to pull off on. It was one officer and just me, and not a single street light anywhere. As somebody who's grown up in Oklahoma, that's a scary situation to be in. That's a very scary situation to
I
be
grew
in.
up in South Mississippi, so believe me, I understand.
And I feel like had that officer was I could tell he was bothered by my card.
Right.
But it was because it frustrated him and he didn't know how to deal with it. And
Right.
it was not long after, it was just a couple of weeks after I got my card.
Right.
So, and which was, I got mine within the first month, so it was still fairly new. And I could tell he was frustrated as he handed it to me and turned and said, "Have a nice day," or night, or whatever he said. And
It's one of those things that being polite doesn't go out the window just because you don't have to interact with the police if you don't want to. Being polite, and especially if you're well within your rights and you have less than what you're legally allowed to possess, you've got nothing to worry about. Be as polite as you can be.
He did ask me, "Do you have any illegal drugs in the car?" And I looked at him over my glasses and said, "I have no illegal drugs in my car."
And that's the right answer.
And that was what I said. So, and that's when the conversation got a little more in detail.
Unfortunately, we can talk about Terry stops and we can talk about all these legal.
What is a Terry stop?
A Terry stop is an officer has to have a reasonable suspicion that you've committed a crime, you're about to commit a crime, or you've just committed a crime, in order to have probable cause to stop you and question you. Only upon a Terry stop do you even have the requirement, and there's some debate about this, to even identify yourself. But there's Terry, there's some Texas cases, there's a bunch of other cases out there that deal with all these little legal minutia about your rights and when you have to interact with the police, when you don't, what they can ask you, what they can't. They ask you, when can you, when do you have to identify yourself? Don't you have to identify yourself? What I'd say is don't get involved in the legal minutia. Identify yourself, present your medical card, and let them do what they're going to do. Because again, if they really want to take you to jail, they're going to take you to jail. And what I don't want to have happen is what's happened to some people when they are legally correct in their resistance to an officer. They still end up on the ground tasered, with pepper spray in their face, handcuffed in the back of a car. Yeah, we might beat the case, and we might, bring an action against them, but
now your eyes burn.
Right. I would just prefer you avoid the whole situation. So manners go a long way, and you just have to use some. I'm a lawyer, and if I get pulled over by the police, which is very, very, very rare, I'm always polite to them, even if I don't agree with them.
So perhaps you do Uber, so I could just have Ron in the car when I'm going around when I get pulled over.
Yeah, I
bet that's not the normal fee, though, is it?
What's funny is there's a video actually where an Uber driver gets pulled over. His passenger had marijuana or some drugs on him, and the officer gets sort of sideways with the Uber driver. And he said, "Where'd you get your law degree?" And the guy gives the answer where he got his law degree. Apparently, he was just like a first-year attorney, and he had a law degree. He's like, "Here's my bar card." That was pretty funny. There's a video. It's on YouTube somewhere. It's a good watch.
That's great. So, do you see any? Some of these legislators just like I do. Do you see anything as far as the personal laws? Do you see any restrictions being changed? Say, like the home grow. Do you see anybody doing anything towards other than the cities, which, as you say, we'll be able to fight that in the long run anyway?
No, and I mean in conversations with like Florida Eccles and Fed Getter and all the other ones that we've had conversations with multiple times, I don't foresee them trying to subvert the will of the people, so to speak. The final bills had to be filed today with the final language, so I will admit that I was waiting until tomorrow to read the final submitted bills to see what people are trying to propose as far as a final draft of a bill. So I don't know if there's anything sitting out there that's sort of going to address that issue. But rest assured that if there are problems related to protections for businesses or patients, I'm not going anywhere.
That's great. Okay, well, let's take another break, and I've got some more questions.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in a minute with more with Ron.